This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw. We discuss the hot button topics of the NBA, and this is a special edition of the Baseline NBA podcast where we want to highlight the passing of really one of the great coaches of our generation. And I don't know if whether or not a whole lot has been spoken about the passing of Jerry Sloan, but all I know is that he was more than just a great head coach. He was a great man. He did great things, and he took a small market team and elevated them to where they were in the conversation of at least 2 years of really being a thorn in the side of greatness. But it shouldn't be me that talks about a man in the stature of a guy like Jerry Sloan. Shaw and I always try to articulate, sometimes we need to bring somebody in who knows the man, the myth, the legend, and can articulate it best prepared. But before I do all of that, I got to make sure I'm rolling out the red carpet to my dog, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC, my man, Mr. Warren Shaw. Thank you for hopping on board with us this week on this special episode. And I think it's only right that we allot ourselves this opportunity to give way to speak on a legend that the NBA community is going to sorely miss.
Couldn't say it better, man. I'm excited to have a great guest on here. We had to take our time to do it right. That's the first, most important thing about this. But we're going to hear some great stories about Sloan, coaching, his human side, his wit, his humor, and everything that just made up the person that he was ultimately, man. So I'm excited about this week's guest, somebody who's been with us a couple times before. Sad that we bring him in, on this note, but still giving us a great wealth of knowledge on the topic.
Yeah, and listen, it goes without saying that this man has been covering the Utah Jazz for some umpteen years, and he does a fantabulous job. Sean and myself have met him numerous times during NBA All-Star Weekend. He is an NBA insider. He is a Utah Jazz insider. But more importantly, he was someone that Jerry Sloan very much respected. And I just think it's only right that we bring one of the OGs who's been on our show before to be able to help us properly memorialize the greatness of Jerry Sloan. We got our man, Tony Jones from The Athletic. Tony, thanks for hopping on board with us this week. I know it's not under the best of circumstances, but I don't think that there's a better person to help us talk about the greatness of Jerry Sloan than you, brother.
No problem, man. I appreciate you having me on. This is love. I definitely appreciate this.
All right. So obviously, the NBA community again has been rocked this time with the passing of Jerry Sloan. I think the first thing that I want to get a sense of is because obviously, the circumstance of how Jerry passed away, we don't need to get into the intricacies of that. I'm more so of the mindset that it's like, how does it resonate with people knowing that we really didn't have as much an opportunity over the last few years to be able to see Jerry Sloan be, in the throes of everything going on and weighing in probably as much as he did in his heyday. How is it for you in your area, your community, about people taking this in about Jerry's passing?
Well, he was, obviously, he's just a legend, just an all-timer, and he transcends, in the state of Utah, he transcends basketball and he transcends sport. And, nationally, he's, to me, he's got to be one of the best to ever do it in terms of being a basketball coach. And, I don't think much separates him from, Greg Popovich or Red Auerbach or Phil Jackson or Red Holtzman, those guys. But, other than the fact that he didn't win a championship, but, he was, just what he meant to the state of Utah, and what he meant to the sport of basketball, what he meant to, the state of Illinois, what he meant to, small market franchises in the NBA, his value to the league as a whole, and his legacy will be far-reaching, and it's set in stone. He'll never be forgotten.
So I'm going to ask a question that is, maybe a little sensitive in some aspect, but I'm interested in your thoughts on this, Tony, when it comes to the timing of his passing, in 2020, amidst all that we've endured as a world, you know what I mean? From David Stern passing earlier in the year, Kobe passing, and now the pandemic and everything that has happened, I almost feel like I don't know. I don't feel like he's getting enough publicity, maybe, and that's because I don't live in the Utah area, so to speak. But I just don't feel like the national coverage is what it needs to be for a person of his magnitude. And am I like just way off based on that, or what's just kind of what's your perspective on that?
I'm, I'm not sure. That's probably my answer, because I do live in Utah, and I think his passing here in the state, I think there might be like a Jerry Sloan drive in Salt Lake City one day, or Jerry Sloan statue, or a Jerry Sloan day. Here this has been probably the biggest news of the year. I think nationally, I think there might be an argument for that, or a conversation for that, and I think it might be because the Jazz didn't win a championship. But I think among basketball people with basketball minds, his passing was every bit as big as, David Stern's passing, or Kobe's passing. Kobe's a unique thing. He's a unique figure because he transcended basketball, like almost like no other. And he was, his value. I don't want to say his value, but I mean his popularity was international and worldwide. So Jerry Sloan was a little different than that. But I think among basketball people, that this is just as big an event as any.
I want to jump in on this point, and it may not be so much a question, but I probably am going to want your reaction to this, Tony, because Shaw is actually bringing up a very interesting perspective here, and I kind of feel like, in a way, and I completely hear where you're coming from, but I feel like in a way, Jerry Sloan's greatness seems to be anywhere west of Memphis, right? Like the great teams in the Western Conference seem to have to be able to utter the words Jerry Sloan maybe in the same breath as they say Greg Popovich, and maybe minus Doc Rivers. I don't seem to hear his name emanating nearly as much here in the East Coast, and I'm in New Jersey. It's like people still have to keep bringing up Jeff Van Gundy, you know what I'm saying, before they bring up Jerry Sloan, and I just find that to be disrespectful. I only say that because he was a part of a organization that wasn't great for like this little small intermittent period. This organization was great for like almost 2 decades basically under Jerry Sloan, right? And so I guess to me it hurts a little bit because I grew up trying to appreciate all the other teams that weren't the Los Angeles Lakers, in that period, or the Phoenix Suns, or maybe even the Houston Rockets. And you have to put the Utah Jazz in that spectrum. And I feel like now the only reason why we're talking about Jerry Sloan is because of a small little clip of him being in front of a podium saying, "Oh, we got beat by 42 points by Michael Jordan's Chicago Bulls." You know what I'm saying? Like, there's so much more to what I think could have been. I know that The Last Dance isn't the platform to have done that, but I felt like this is the only reason why now people are mentioning anything about Jerry Sloan, minus the fact of his passing, which I just think in a way it's just kind of hurtful because he is such a great coach. He's the fourth winningest coach in NBA history, and we don't talk about him nearly as much as we still talk about Popovich or Jackson or any of these other guys that either are gone or, are just kind of half foot in, half foot out the door with what they want to do now beyond the basketball, beyond, coaching careers.
Yeah, I think I think when you look at the Jazz and you look at Jerry Sloan I think a lot of this resonates with John Stockton and Karl Malone as well. I mean, those guys, we know that they are all-time greats, and we know John Stockton is one of the top 5 point guards that ever played the game. We know that Karl Malone is probably one of the top 3 power forwards to ever play the game. We know that, Jerry Sloan is probably one of the top 5 to 10 coaches to ever walk the sidelines. Those guys did what they did, and especially in their prime and in their heyday, they were under the radar. And Utah is not Los Angeles. Utah is not New York. And why is Reggie Miller so either loved or hated in New York? Because for a period of 5 years, there was a huge rivalry between the New York Knicks and the Indiana Pacers. That spilled over into the postseason, and that spilled over into classic performances at Madison Square Garden, which is the mecca of basketball. So Jerry did a lot of what he did with no fanfare, and so did John Stockton and so did Karl Malone. He wasn't somebody who wanted the spotlight. He wasn't somebody who sought the spotlight. So those are kind of the reasons why, he could, so to speak, go under the radar a little bit in passing. But, I think NBA Twitter, social media in general, on Friday and this weekend, they really recognized, exactly how much he contributed to the game of basketball and how much he contributed to the Jazz and to the NBA in general. And I think among basketball people, I think that, they recognize exactly how important a figure that he is in NBA history.
So I need to commend you, Tony, on a great article as always on The Athletic, what you wrote about him, on the day past. One of the things that stood out to me in that article, and something that I remember even from growing up in the days, was just his overall competitive nature. When I think about some of these old time guys where they're just so thankful that they've made it and they don't take anything for granted. And I think about a guy like Jerry West who used to get sick, because he was so competitive and just couldn't take it. Can you just talk a little bit about that, and that mantra, the culture that he built around being so competitive and just a hardworking individual throughout the course of his career?
Yeah, he's somebody who hated to lose. And, I interviewed Bob Weiss, the former longtime NBA coach and somebody who played with Jerry with the Chicago Bulls, and he said that Jerry's competitiveness is right up there with Michael Jordan. And he carried that competitiveness from a player to a coach to being a coach. He took every loss hard. He had issues dealing with losing, and when he was in the throes of competition, he wanted to win every time. So among our greats, Michael Jordan's of the world, just the Kobe Bryant's, LeBron James, those guys, they're ultra competitive, so competitive that, losing hurts. They would they love to win, but they hated losing more. And I think that speaks a lot about what Jerry's character was. He was, just a guy that wanted to win every time. And I think that that's one of the reasons why the Jazz turned out to be such a great franchise, over the bulk of the 23 years that he was there.
Tony Jones joining us here on the Baseline NBA podcast. All right, Tony, I want to ask you this question because it's been really digging at me. I look at, Jerry Sloan's final season as a head coach. The team's record, I think, was like 31-23. So it was above 500 team when he chose to walk away. Not too many coaches, choose to do that, like walk away. Obviously recognizing that health issues is really compartmentalizing his ability to coach the way that he wants to coach. I look at the career of a guy like Darren Williams, and I say to myself, damn it, man, if Darren wasn't as much of a pain, and I'm saying this, it's my own opinion, just me personally, and I'm sorry, it's gonna sound disrespectful me saying it about him. It is what it is because this is how I feel about it. I think he was a coach killer. But I say to myself, if he had his mind right and actually, really stuck with what Sloan was trying to build and what he was trying to do, how great do you really think Darren Williams would have been with Jerry Sloan?
Well, I thought in Darren's prime, I thought he had a 3-year run where he was the best point guard in the NBA.
Right, exactly. I said the same thing. I loved him coming out of the University of Illinois, and I thought that he was the sleeper pick for the Utah Jazz. Like, he to me was so perfect for what Utah needed and for what I thought, represents what Jerry Sloan could do with a guy like him that nobody was talking about. That was just my personal opinion at the time.
Yeah, I thought he was, I thought he had a 3-year run where he was the best point guard in the league. I think what killed him as much as anything were the ankle injuries that he suffered in New Jersey. Once he suffered that, he lost his explosion off the dribble. And, once he lost his explosion off the dribble, he kind of became another guy. He was still good, but he was never the same. And I think one of the more important things was that Jerry's system was perfect for him. And he went to, the Nets, and it was another system. So that was an issue for him as well. I think that he's an example of the grass isn't always greener. And I think that he knows that. And I think that's one of the reasons why Darren reached out and in recent years and kind of made peace with Jerry. And, the two talked through their differences. And, by the time Jerry got to the point, by the time Darren did it before it was too late. And that's probably the best thing that I can say about him.
But you have to be appreciative of that as well, too, because most players don't, and most coaches don't. I mean, the vitriol runs so deep. And I know that the fraternities are split, at the seams when you talk about the players, as having a brotherhood, and the coaches, they have their brotherhood as well, too. But I mean, without either one of these, the game just don't work. And when you have moments where you're responsible for a team being good, a team being great, essentially, and things just completely fall by the wayside, whether it's because of the business or it's really because of personal reasons, you would hope that at some point, you find a way to reconcile with that and make peace with it, so that there isn't those question marks of saying, what if, or, what could have been, or had I had that chance or had that opportunity before things are just way too far gone to really not only make peace with the other person, but also make peace with themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And Darren did that. And, he started coming back to Utah Jazz games this season. So I think they, in large measure, he and Jerry got to make peace with each other, and that's really a good thing, because it would have been a shame if they hadn't. And I think Darren realizes that he made a mistake with how he dealt with things here in Utah. I think that had he stayed in Utah and stayed healthy, I mean, we're talking about a guy who could have really built his resume to the point where, where the sky was the limit for him. But we all make different decisions when we're young that we kind of try to rethink when we're older. And I think Darren, I think Darren did made some decisions that I think that if he had a chance to do it over again, he would have probably did some things differently.
Tony, one of the great lines I think in your article regarding Sloan is just a simple sentence. He was incapable of nonsense. But later on, you discuss his his love for his players, right? And how each trade, if a guy was traded away like that, that really impacted him. Do you see that kind of still in today's NBA? Are there coaches that are kind of even in like that? Because I feel like it's such a business now in general, but it's so interesting with a guy who has that kind of that rough exterior personality, but he felt so deeply for the people that he was coaching and working with, and that a simple trade impacted him in that way. Just talk a little bit about your sense of that compared to where maybe the way coaches feel today.
Yeah, I don't know if you see so much of that anymore. I mean, it's I think the NBA is a real business, and what matters more than anything is the bottom line. I mean, that's why we're going to have basketball in mid-July, because the league knows that if they don't come back, the implications financially, not only this year but in years in future years, could be devastating. So I think that like anything in life, it's about the bottom line. And I think that I think that sometimes you have to coach and you have to be businesslike and not let feelings be in the way. I think Jerry could feel that way because he had so much job security, and I think that that's your major thing here. I mean, right now, who are the coaches who have almost absolute job security? We're talking about maybe Greg Popovich or Rick Carlisle, and so Jerry Sloan had a kind of job security that was unique. It didn't matter. It didn't matter what happened around him, as long as he, felt like coaching, he was going to be the head coach of the Utah Jazz. So I think that he could afford to be that way, to have, compassion beyond the business-like sense for the guys that he worked with. So, but that being said, that's a real admirable character trait to have, to really care about the players is more than commodities, more than what they can do for you, more than, those guys being able to put food on your table, but to care about them as human beings. So I really admired that about Coach Sloan.
Tony, as you're, kind of highlighting all of these great qualities, there's one thing about Jerry Sloan that, I can honestly say I have the utmost respect for him. And because in this climate of where things are in the NBA and where things have trended over the last few years, you could have easily made the argument Jerry Sloan should be the general manager / head coach, right? Like he had, like, he's been so enthralled in that Jazz organization and helped build that Jazz organization to such levels. And he's always, at least from what I got, and maybe, you let me know if I'm wrong here, he's always made it known that he just wants to coach, right? He doesn't, if he felt it necessary that he wanted to be the general manager, to be the president of basketball operations, to be whatever titles are being thrown out there in this day and age, to be considered upper management, he could have easily been that. But he wanted to coach. And I respect that from an individual like himself, because if you just take away the wins, you look at the impact that he's had on players. He's taken guys that would just be marginalized players elsewhere and turned them into household names, community cavaliers. He's made them, really important people, not just to the Utah community, but to the NBA community. Whereas in this day and age, every head coach seems to have an aspiration that even if they fail at being a head coach, they still think that they can run a basketball team, or they think that they can own a basketball team because they were great. And I don't understand where that mentality comes from sometimes, but I just have a lot of respect for an individual who, when he had those options, he chose still to do what it is that he knows within his heart what he loved to do, and he still did it, and he did it so greatly.
Well, the funny thing was Jerry wanted to coach, but he would have been fine being an assistant. He said as much to Frank Layden when he was Frank's assistant. He said, "Hey, I'll stay here the rest of my career and just be your assistant. I'm fine with that." And then a few months later, Frank becomes the president of Utah Jazz, and his first hire as president his first move as president is to hire Jerry Sloan as his head coach. Jerry was a simple guy. He was, he loved to fish. He loved to go to the bar and pound a few beers back, and he loved collecting and restoring antiques, and he loved basketball. So he was unique. He was a unique person, and I think the biggest thing that you could say is that he knew his lane, and he knew which lane that he wanted to stay in, and he was obviously, the thing about it was, even if he wasn't the general manager, don't think for a second he wasn't making or helping make a lot of decisions. He had a lot of say in personnel matters. So that part, I guess it was kind of the best of both worlds for him a little bit. He had a lot of say in draft personnel, free agency personnel, things like that. But he also didn't want the responsibility. He wanted to, just be the head coach of the Utah Jazz. So he was a guy that didn't ask for a lot in life, and for as demanding as he was as a head coach, outside of being a head coach, he was pretty non-demanding in life.
So Tony, only because I know you have the breadth of basketball knowledge that you do, I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit. Just in your opinion, where did Jerry rank in terms of, guys who played the game and then actually became coaches in the game? Obviously, his win totals as a coach are undeniable, but he was a pretty damn good player himself as well too, and a two-time All-Star, et cetera, et cetera. Where do you rank him, amongst guys who did both in that aspect?
Well, he was a better player at the NBA level than Phil Jackson and Pat Riley, even though those two guys were good players in their own right. I would probably put Phil and Pat above Jerry as head coaches. So I would say that probably kind of evens all three of them out a little bit. I don't remember. I don't think Greg Popovich played in the league.
No.
If he did, I don't remember. So I would say that, your three standard bearers are Jerry Sloan, Pat Riley, and Phil Jackson.
But you are saying, but Tony, you are saying that Jerry Sloan is better than Doc Rivers.
I would say that's a good question.
All right, so if Shaw wasn't putting you on the spot, then maybe I was putting you on the spot.
It's not. No, it's not putting. No, I'm trying to figure out who I would take based on their careers as players, because Doc played at an all-star level as well when he was in his prime with the Atlanta Hawks, and Jerry made, like 4 All-NBA defensive teams, a couple of All-NBA teams, period, a couple of All-Star teams, and he had his number retired as a player. So he had his number retired as a player. He had his number retired as a head coach, and that number is 1223. The number of wins that he had with the Jazz. I would probably go. Oof, that's a tough one.
Well, you seem like you already made the answer for me. Like Jerry is ahead of Doc. There's no, I love Doc. You know, no disrespect to Doc, but you know,
see, Doc won a title as a coach.
yeah. He did. Ubuntu.
So,
I know. But,
and Doc has turned two franchises into elite NBA teams.
but you know what?
It's kind of like a dead heat for me.
But you know what you could do though, because you could also make the argument that Jerry Sloan does have two bona fide NBA Hall of Famers now under his belt. And Doc Rivers, while he partially coached Paul Pierce, he didn't coach Paul Pierce through most of his career. And he caught Kevin Garnett when Kevin Garnett had already made, already had a resume of being a Hall of Fame basketball player in Minnesota before he even came, you know what I'm saying, before he came over. So he's been the kind of coach where he's had access to players in their prime, but isn't necessarily responsible for coaching up players to be Hall of Famers as of yet. The jury is still out for however long he still coaches. And I think to me, that would also give the edge, Jerry Sloan the edge over Doc Rivers. To me, it would balance out the fact that Doc has the one title, from, as a head coach in Boston in comparison to Jerry Sloan's, success, as the head coach of the Utah Jazz.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that point. I mean, I do think, I think that by the time Jerry took over, Stockton and Malone were probably 15 or 20% of the way of what they were going to be. So he built them almost from the ground up. But Jerry built Darren Williams and Carlos Boozer completely from the ground up.
Right.
So I would, as to where, Doc got, a prime Chris Paul, a prime Blake Griffin. He had, the big three. Now Doc does get credit for building Rajon Rondo into an all-star point guard, because when he got Rajon Rondo and he put Rajon in the starting lineup, I mean, almost everybody was like, well, that's the weak link in the Boston Celtics. He's a backup. And then by the time, Rajon left Boston, he was an all-NBA guy.
Right.
So Doc gets credit for that as well. It's a tough one. But yeah, Doc and Pat Riley and Jerry Sloan and Phil Jackson, I mean, those are your four guys to answer that question. That's a good question.
Well said, Tony. So final one before we let you get out of here, brother, man. Just, give us one tidbit or just maybe your favorite story that you heard or maybe interacted with when it comes to Jerry Sloan.
Can I curse?
Yeah, it's all good, brother. Absolutely.
All right, I'm just saying. I mean, it's like Biggie when he was on. It's like Biggie when he was on Funk Master Flex and on Hot 97. He was like, "Yo, I can't do this if I can't curse."
Well, yeah. Listen, man. Like, I mean, we ain't gonna treat you like Heavy D now. You know what I'm saying? So we got God. You know what I'm saying? God. Rest in power, Heavy D, man. That was one of my favorite tracks that he did. But
I'll give you a trivia question about me. Me and Funk Master Flex went to the same high school, not at the same time, but we went to the same high school.
Oh, word. Sorry, yeah, you never forget your New York roots, though. I know that's what's up.
So, okay, so Jerry would after he retired, whenever he would see me whenever he would come to a game and he would see me at the arena, I'd say, "Hey, coach," and he'd say, "Tony Jones," and he'd say, "Are they still letting you write that bullshit in the Salt Lake Tribune?" and I'd say, "Really good to see you, coach." And he'd be like, "Good to see you too." So
that would so be Jerry Sloan. It's just,
that's
I mean, dry as the damn desert. It's just like, I
I can
mean,
definitely appreciate that.
oh my goodness, Tony, man. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead,
you
man.
had to appreciate his humor, man. You had to appreciate it.
I
He was a
listen.
funny guy.
It would be. It's interesting. Sean and myself, we had the opportunity to to do an interview with a great individual who's doing a great platform. In conjunction with the NBPA, and he asked us, who would we, want to have a quote unquote co-star experience with, and you know, I wish we had had this conversation with you, and you told me that story about Jerry Sloan, because then I would have replaced my basketball co-star experience with just having 5 minutes with Jerry Sloan. Um, there was just something about him, man. He's just one. He even there's few people who try to do things, and that they do it to play for the cameras, and then there are people who do things and they are just as natural on in front of the camera as they would be off of the camera. And I was always fascinated by how Jerry Sloan comported himself, not to the media, but even just in general. And he would be like one of those people that I see in my neighborhoods right now if I'm walking my dog, and I could just sit there and have like a 30-minute conversation easy with him, no problem. And probably be laughing my ass on the way back to telling my girlfriend, the crazy neighbor that we have up the street, who's got great stories to tell. Like, that to me is the kind of Jerry Sloan that I always had seen, when he was the coach for the Utah Jazz.
Yeah, coach was one of a kind, man. And I don't think the NBA will see many guys like his kind ever again. I mean, he was a guy that was just so unique on and off the floor. Um, for his intensity and then for his humanity off the floor. He was a guy that I personally gonna miss, because he was very good to me, and he didn't have to be very good to me. And um, I think the key to your character is, who are you? Are you do you give the people that you don't have to give the time of day? And Jerry gave me the time of day, and he didn't have to, and I'll always appreciate him for that.
If you haven't had the opportunity, guys, to check out the story, the article written by Tony on The Athletic, I would so encourage you to do so. Go to theathletic.com, and the title is Remembering Jerry Sloan. Tony, man, thank you so much for the stories. Thank you for the introspect. Thank you just for being who you are, man, because if there's ever a voice that can carry, exactly what Jerry Sloan should mean to people who didn't know who Jerry Sloan was, if there's a person who can communicate that, I don't think we would have found a better person than yourself to be able to do that with us this week, brother.
No problem. I really, really, really appreciate you for having me. This is definitely a lot of fun.
Damn, Shaw, man. Like, when we have great people, like our man Tony, um, really kind of colorize and paint a beautiful canvas of why we can appreciate the game of basketball as much as you and I do, with individuals like himself talking about other great individuals. It almost makes you feel like we were there in the room when all of this was going down, or we were there by the court side where all of that was going down. Um, and it just makes you feel good. It makes you feel good because it does mean that it matters, when people can, you know, provide you with a story that feels like everybody was there to see it unfold because it's being spoken and told by that person who was there to see it unfold. It's just great, man, and I'm just so fortunate that Tony did have that chance to meet and have a man like Jerry Sloan in his life for him to write about and the teams that he followed and covered.
Honestly, dude, I think when you look at this in its totality, we are connoisseurs of the game. We love the game itself, and but we know we don't know everything. We have to have enough humility amongst ourselves to understand that, hey, we can't properly articulate every situation that goes out there. And this is why, again, we had to take our time, collect our own thoughts on this, and then bring in Tony, who spent some time with Jerry and has been around the Utah Jazz for a very long time as well, and someone who we know and trust and like as a person and as an individual, even in that as well too. Like Tony is not just another media type, if you will, that we kind of happen to engage with. We care about that dude, and we care about his opinion. And he brought some real great, interesting stories, facts, well thought out conversation to our podcast, so that our fans and listeners can really get the real of the man, the myth, the legend that you alluded to, and when it comes to Jerry Sloan.
Am I though? Was I off though when I was talking with Tony about my sentiments or my perspective about what I sense in reference to um, how Jerry Sloan's passing didn't just really seem to resonate as loudly. I mean, I want to give credence to the fact that we are in the middle of a pandemic, and everything is being so convoluted that unless it's a person who's passed away because of the COVID, 19 virus, that it doesn't seem to have as much teeth per se. But um, nonetheless, a person of his greatness, I just feel like there should have been more media felt noise than just what to what Tony was saying was is that the fact that there was a lot of outreach on Twitter, which I know he for his, especially for his profession, he has to maintain, monitor that and everything like that. I just felt like in a way, I don't know if it just struck people. I don't know. Maybe a week from now, 2 weeks from now, it may really hit people that he's no longer there. But it almost feels like in the same breath of why we just seem to always have been disrespecting the Utah Jazz because they're just like this little team that sandwiched, between the California and Texas, you know, and they just no one ever seems to want to take them seriously. And I don't know, I just feel some kind of way about that because some of the great teams that we never talk about, you wind up finding out it was a Utah Jazz team that was led by Jerry Sloan.
I think we'll just kind of lend back to what Tony said specifically. I think, in the closest of basketball circles, and obviously in the great state of Utah, they understand, they're feeling it and they're feeling it tremendously. And I agree in some aspect that from a national standpoint, I just know I haven't heard as much, but that might also go to the profession itself, right? Only because he was a great NBA player, but most of us around today didn't really see him play. So we know him as a coach. And then coaches just don't get that same level of respect and notoriety, in a lot of ways. I mean, recently Don Shula passed away, a great football coach, and obviously in the South Florida area, it was a really big deal. And I heard so much about it because I live in the South Florida area, but I don't know how that story played out nationally. But, to Tony's point, in the case of Shula specifically, Shula won a title, and where Sloan didn't. So again, I'm not besmirching his name or taking any accolades away from him in that regard, but that might be why we don't feel the same level of just weight when it comes to the coverage of his passing. But in one way or another, we're going to make sure that he is honored, and I think the basketball community will continue to do that. But I just feel like a lot of it is kind of the par for the course, if you will, for his profession that he was most famous for, and when it comes to coaching.
Well, that's definitely a very poignant way of putting it, Shaw. And I completely agree with you. I think that, and maybe in a way, it makes me selfishly feel like a basketball savant, which I don't think in that context at all. But I feel like the exclusivity of having someone like Tony Jones, which we are always honored to have on our show to be able to kind of highlight such important events, and in him being able to be one of those individuals to highlight an important moment again, where the NBA community loses someone of this ilk, someone of this type of greatness. And listen, he wasn't like, you know, 90 something years old, but he definitely lived a full life. And I'm glad that a good portion of that life was providing us with great basketball to watch, with providing us with a window into the future of what the NBA could grow to be. When you have great coaching and a great organization who believes in their coaching, and the players who most people would overlook become great because of that coach. Like, you know, Jerry Sloan is a gateway to a better understanding that there is a blueprint for these things, and it can be done. It can be replicated. It doesn't have to be, the same style for every single person to assume that they're going to be great. And even if that greatness doesn't mean hoisting an NBA trophy, you'd be hard pressed not to tell me that the Utah fans, would not want another 10 years of Jerry Sloan coaching a basketball team for them to go watch play basketball, than worrying about whether or not they would be, a great basketball team always in an NBA finals. I think that they would trade that in, 50 times over, which really tells you the magnitude of Jerry Sloan and the impact that he had on not just the Utah Jazz, but also the Utah community. Once again, we'd like to thank our man, Tony Jones from The Athletic. Once again, please go and check out his article commemorating Jerry Sloan. It's on The Athletic. If you go to theathletic.com, great piece. And as always, man, we love promoting and pushing, great writers who really tell it exactly like it is. And we were just fortunate to have them on board to do the same for us. Once again, for the baseline, Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. You know we do. And we'll catch up with you next time.